Map drawing has begun. North Carolina's election redistricting process has entered a new stage. Joining us with expert analysis is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, now that we have entered the map drawing stage, this basically means an end to that process that took several weeks of gathering public input at hearings across the state. What did you gather from the hearings?
Well, I gather from the hearings that people have a wide variety of ideas about what they think constitutes good redistricting. I've attended a couple of hearings, either in person or watching them on video. There were a lot of concerns about splitting towns, splitting counties, and those sorts of things. A disproportionate amount of the information in the hearings came from people in organized groups or people with a perspective. I know I testified at one of the hearings. There were people from various organizations testifying to the hearings. Probably more people from organizations than, say, regular citizens there. So I think if you're only listening to what you're getting at the hearings, you're probably getting a skewed idea of what people are interested in, to the extent that they are interested in the nuts and bolts of redistricting.
Well, speaking of the nuts and bolts, I just mentioned the map drawing has actually started. What should people know about how that process is playing out?
An interesting thing that's happening this time is that North Carolina has this unique system. It's called county groupings or county clusterings, where they try to get the minimum number of districts within the minimum number of counties. It's a fairly complicated system. Sometimes, for example, Onslow County gets its own state senate district. Other times there will be multiple districts in multiple counties. But those are often set by geography and law. They're really not up to the legislators to change, and a lot of the redistricting process is going to be dictated by that. There are exceptions to that, of course, like Wake County, Mecklenburg County. They have a lot of districts within the county lines, and so the county borders don't really affect redistricting there. But for most of the state, you really got to pay attention to what county grouping is your county in before you can kind of figure out, what are my districts going to look like.
And the county grouping element crops up really because of the constitutional mandate that you don't split counties more than you have to, right?
Right. That is a requirement. This is an attempt to balance, especially with, this is only in North Carolina legislative districts. This is not in congressional districts. This is an attempt to balance a constitutional requirement that you keep counties whole with the constitutional requirement that you have balanced, more or less equal populations. Now, we used to handle that through multi-member districts. That was struck down by the North Carolina Supreme Court about 20 years ago, and so now we have to cross county lines sometimes, but the court says you must do that to the minimum extent possible in order to comply with the Constitution.
In the old days, redistricting was done where the members of the Senate and House would come to a meeting, they'd get maps plopped in front of them and said, vote for these. This is taking place in a much different way. Basically, all of it's taking place in an open committee room with live stream video and audio.
Right, and this is something, the legislature kind of learns from lawsuits, essentially, and other issues that come up. This is essentially the same process that they had when they drew districts in 2019 under court order. And the legislature decided, well, this basically works. We have a much more open process. You don't necessarily have to draw things in a small room and then vote yes or no. If you let legislators get to work on these things, they're going to draw maps. There's going to be inevitable compromises as different members of the General Assembly bring their own ideas. And I expect that we have 8 different computers, 4 in the House, 4 in the Senate chambers, where members are going to be working. And I'm expecting over the course of time, we're going to have dozens, hundreds of maps, and you're probably going to start seeing some coalescence around a relative handful of maps that they'll start voting and trying to figure out what's the best districts for the House and the Senate.
In fact, that's something that you wrote about at the John Locke Foundation's blog, The Locker Room, that there are no plans to limit how many plans could be considered, but you expect at some point there probably will be some sort of limit, either if it's put on by the legislative leadership or just the people working on this will realize we have to limit this somehow.
Yeah, at some point, practicality has to get in there because I'm sure nobody wants to spend 4 or 5 weeks on these computers hammering them out. And I'm expecting also, as I mentioned earlier, the way that the county clustering shapes the possibilities of redistricting is going to limit a lot of those. And so you're really going to end up figuring out a few basic questions like how are you going to, for example, do the 2 Senate districts in Cumberland and Moore counties, because they have an option of either splitting Fayetteville or keeping it together. What are you going to do about the Havelock precinct that's going to be split, exactly how you're going to split it? And so these are the kind of questions that they're really going to have to bear down on, aside from the political questions, which both sides are going to have to hammer out as well. But there's a lot of this technical stuff that they're going to have to hammer in, and I think once they start seeing what the reality is, they're going to start coalescing around a handful of maps. That's my expectation.
What do we know at this point about the timeline?
The timeline that I heard is that they're expecting to have this process done in about 2 weeks. That's what they said in the committee hearing meetings. That could very easily go longer. I mean, this is the session that will not end. It's been going on a lot longer, and so it could be that legislators may dig in their heels and fight out a little longer than we hope. Hopefully we'll have some maps that they can discuss in the next 2 weeks and then hammer that out, get a little bit more public comment, and have districts by, I hope, early November.
The blog entry at the John Locke Foundation's Locker Room blog has the headline, "Redistricting, Legislators Start Drawing Maps Today," talking about Wednesday. And the author of that blog entry and the person who will be monitoring redistricting closely in the weeks to come is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.